Hello, hello, hello everyone. My name is John Sierra and I am a Tolkien scholar, and I thought a fun video to do, sort of a change, is to go through a Iceberg meme based off of The Lord of the Rings or Tolkien's work in general, and just sort of look it up and see if I can find a good one to go through and see how much I could actually explain from it. So I went on Google and I searched for Lord of the Rings, or maybe I searched for Tolkien. I think I searched for Tolkien Iceberg, and I found a bunch of them. And this one I found on Reddit. And let me see. Hold on one second. I'll tell you who posted it on Reddit. This was posted by. Oh, unfortunately, their account's been deleted. But I thought this was the one that had the most things on it. I haven't really looked at it because I wanted to go into this relatively fresh. Now, I am aware that sometimes icebergs can have sort of trolly things on there. They'll put something weird or obscure, especially near the bottom, and they'll write "do not." They'll write "do not research," as a meme, or sometimes there's complete, wild things that are just untrue. Sometimes it's fan theories, or sometimes it's just outright lies. Hopefully this one's good. There's a lot, and I do mean a lot of things on this. So let's get started. We're going to start at the top and move our way down and see, can I actually explain everything that's on here? I need to move it over here, though. Okay, so let's show it on screen here, and why am I not seeing it? There it is. Okay, so that is the top layer, and we'll be scrolling through it. So I'm just going to try and describe each of these things as best I can, quickly if I can. Some of these things, if there's something I might need to go into more detail about, I will. But since there are a lot of them, there are several layers. Just here, let me just scroll through it just to show you here how much there is. Look at all that. So let's just start at the top. So usually the top is stuff that's really, surface level, very self-explanatory. The Peter Jackson movies. Of course, there was the three films based off of Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the Kings. They came out in the early 2000s. They were very good. Of course, the extended editions came out later. They were much better. There's not much to say about the Peter Jackson films. The movie cast, I mean, everybody's aware of the primary cast. You have Ian McKellen, and you had Elijah Wood, and you had Sean Astin and Viggo Mortensen, and all these great actors. So yeah, there's not much to say about that. The One Ring is, of course, Sauron's ring, the ruling ring, the one ring to rule them all. That's the important MacGuffin in the story. The Lord of the Rings. It is about rings, the rings of power, and of course the One Ring was created by Sauron specifically to rule over all of the other rings of power. So anybody who had a ring of power would be controlled by Sauron. It didn't work out exactly the way he planned, but the Nazgul were sort of his success there. The Eye of Sauron. And the Eye of Sauron, a lot of people think that is Sauron at the top of his tower, that big flaming eyeball thing from the film. That's really more akin to a spell that Sauron uses to be able to see very far. He is in the tower. He does have a real body. You don't really see it very much. At the very beginning of the film, you see him all clad in armor back in the Second Age when he's fighting Elendil and Gil-galad and Isildur and all that. And in one of the scenes that's only in the extended edition, when Aragorn uses the Palantir, you see Sauron. But yeah. Oh, and there was also a scene that was not used in the film. This might actually be on there. There was the Anatar scene, the scene where Sauron actually appeared at the Black Gate and fought Aragorn. And you could look it up on YouTube. It's completely unfinished. The special effects are not all there. It's a little weird looking, but it was not. There was some footage where it was used, but they covered up the CGI for Sauron with like a troll. So when you see in that final climactic battle at Morannon, any scenes where Aragorn is fighting a troll, that was actually Sauron originally. Peter Jackson changed his mind about that. But yeah, the Eye of Sauron is something that is not mentioned too many times in the book. It's sort of almost symbolic, although there is a literal eye that peers out from the window of Barad-dûr, which is the Dark Tower in Mordor, and Frodo sees the Eye of Sauron when he looks into the Mirror of Galadriel. Hobbits, obviously the main characters, many of them are hobbits. We, of course, have Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin. Bilbo is a hobbit as well. They live mostly in the Shire or the surrounding area in Eriador. They are short little people. They have hairy feet and pointed ears, and they live longer than normal people. Normal people, of course, living, like 70 to 80 years. Low men at least, whereas hobbits typically around 100 years. Of course, there are outliers. Hobbits are kind of an offshoot of the race of men. They are mortals, but they're just a little bit different. They're also called halflings, which means half man, because they are basically men that are half the size. And they're also called Perianath by the elves, and that's just their term for hobbits. Elves and dwarves, of course, some of the other fantasy races. Elves are immortals. They are the firstborn children of Ilúvatar. The dwarves are sort of the adopted children of Ilúvatar. They were created by the Vala Aula. So they're a little different, but yeah, not much to say there. The Fellowship. The Fellowship of the Ring is the 9 characters that set out from Imladris, also known as Rivendell, to bring the ring to Mordor. And of course, there's Frodo and all of his Hobbit companions, Sam, Merry, and Pippin. There's 2 men, which are Aragorn and Boromir. There's, of course, Gandalf, who is the wizard. There's an elf, there's Legolas, and there's a dwarf, there's Gimli, and that's the 9, the Fellowship. The Third Age is the Third Age of Middle-earth is where most of the stories that we're very familiar with take place. The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings are late in the Third Age, and much of the history that you hear about is actually the Third Age. There are of course First and Second Ages. The Silmarillion really deals with the First Age and the Second Age, and of course there's ages beyond that even. There's the Years of the Trees, and beyond that there's the Years of the Lamps, and there's it gets complicated. But we're in the first part. We don't want to go too crazy here. Wizards, there's 5 of them. They came to Middle-earth to spread wisdom and to be leaders. Gandalf, of course, Saruman, Radagast are like the 3 that you hear about. There are 2 others, the Blue Wizards, that you don't hear much about, Alatar and Palando, also known as Marenitar and Ramastano. They're not part of the story, but they're said to be behind the scenes, working against Sauron, and that they actually were important. Gollum, or Smeagol. Smeagol is his real name. He forgot it long ago. He was called Gollum because of the noise he made whenever he coughed. Gollum! Gollum! And they started calling him Gollum. And when he forgot his own name, that's what he called himself. He was a hobbit, believe it or not. He found the One Ring, or rather his relative / best friend Deagle found the One Ring when they were fishing. And then Smeagol stole it from him, murdered his friend, and took the One Ring for himself, and that's how he got the ring. And of course, years and years later, because the One Ring basically made him immortal, he lost it, and Bilbo found it, and that sort of, starts the story in a way. Middle-earth. Middle-earth is the supercontinent that almost all of these stories take place on. The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings all take place in Middle-earth. It is not the Earth. It is a continent called Middle-earth. The elven name for it is Endor. There's really not much to say. There was a land to the west called Aemon. It was sundered from the world. There was another land called Numenor. That's gone as well. But basically, Middle-earth represents Europe, Asia, and Africa. The poem of the ring, 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to bind them, that whole thing, that's what's on the ring. But then it became a poem that started to appear in some versions of the Lord of the Rings. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. And then the actual part that's inscribed on the ring, 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all in the darkness, bind them in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. That's the poem of the ring. Gandalf's death and resurrection. Gandalf died. He fell into the chasm with the Balrog. They fought for 11 days. He kills the Balrog. He dies from exhaustion. He passes from the world. He actually dies. He doesn't go to Valinor. He passes to the Timeless Halls where Eru Ilúvatar, that's God, is, and then is sent back. And he's sent back newly empowered with new authority as the White. He becomes Gandalf the White. He was previously Gandalf the Grey. He replaces Saruman. He leads the free peoples of Middle-earth to victory. Elves are immortal. They are. They don't die. Even if you kill an elf, or they kill themselves, or something happens, they fall down a cliff like Saros did, they don't really die. They just go home. They wind up in a place called the Halls of Mandos, or just called Mandos. Mandos is the Vala that is sort of the Doom Keeper, and he looks over the Halls of Waiting, also known as the Halls of Mandos. And whenever an elf comes there, he basically judges them and decides how long he's going to hold them there until he lets them come back to life. And so the elves don't really ever die. They don't ever truly pass from the world. One does not simply... Okay, so it was a line from the movie where Boromir said, one does not simply walk into Mordor. It was adapted from a similar line that was in the book, but I don't think it was Boromir that said it. It was sort of like a minor little thing. Nobody actually said that in the book. One does not simply walk into Mordor, but it is funny because Frodo and Sam and Gollum did walk into Mordor. It wasn't simple. So he was right. Mordor, of course, that's the next thing on the list, is a land... I don't want to say it's in the southeast of Middle-earth, because we only deal with a portion of Middle-earth that is like the northwest portion of it. There's lands in Middle-earth that we don't ever see. But in the portion of Middle-earth that we deal with in The Lord of the Rings, it is the southeasternmost part. It is sort of a volcanic wasteland, although there are more green areas where the volcanic ash actually enriched the soil. That's where Barad-dûr is. It's where Orodruim is. That's Mount Doom, the volcano, where the ring was made and unmade. There's a giant lake in there, which is actually a salt lake. There's not really much else to say. Mordor is the evil place. The Shire. The Shire is where the journey begins. The Shire is where the hobbits are from. They settled there in the Third Age. They got permission from one of the kings of Arnor, and that's been their land ever since. Elves are ideal or perfect creatures, says someone who never read the Silmarillion. Elves can do pretty messed up things, so I don't know how ideal or perfect they really are. Aragorn is king of Gondor. He's actually king of Gondor and Arnor. He's king for the majority of Middle-earth, or the portion of Middle-earth that we're familiar with. But yes, he is. The Return of the King refers to Aragorn. Mount Doom, I mentioned this is Orodruim, or Mount Doom. That's the volcano. Dragons, there are dragons, of course, in The Hobbit. There is Smaug. There are other dragons in the stories. In the Silmarillion, an important dragon in the War of Wrath was Ancalagon the Black, who was the first dragon that had wings. In the Children of Húrin, there's Glaurung. There's other dragons. There's Skatha and a few others, and there's other dragons that are not named. Ents are the tree-like creatures, Treebeard, Quickbeam, those kind of guys. They're not actually animated trees. They are the shepherds of trees that were created by, I believe, Yavanna created them, and they take care of the trees. So there's not really much to say about Ents. They may have been the basis of the creation of trolls, but that's a theory. And there's trolls. Trolls were possibly created in mockery of Ents, possibly out of corrupted Ents, or just animated from stone. They're large creatures. They're not too bright. They turn to stone if they hit sunlight. There is a later version of them called Olaghai, which are bred to be able to withstand sunlight. They don't really talk so much. They can talk, but they only speak the black speech of Mordor. Elvish. So I think this is one of Tolkien's little it puts Elvish in quotes. I think this is one of Tolkien's linguistic tics, where we would say, generally speaking, Elven, and he preferred the term Elvish. Just like many people would say the plural of dwarf was dwarfs for ages, and Tolkien came up with the idea of saying dwarves with a V, and his editor kept changing it, and he kept saying, stop doing that. Second breakfast, of course, hobbits eat 6 meals a day: breakfast, second breakfast, luncheon, afternoon tea, dinner, and supper. In the movies, they also added 11sies. 11sies is second breakfast. It's brunch. It's British slang for that. But Peter Jackson thought it would be funnier to include that as like sort of a third breakfast, and he was right. It was funnier. Hobbit weed. Okay, so it's not really like weed like marijuana. It is a form of nicotiana, which is nicotine, basically tobacco. And it was brought from Numenor to Middle-earth, and the hobbits were the ones that figured out how to cultivate it as a smokable crop. They figured out what to actually do with it, that it wasn't just some weed. The reason that it has such a mythical sort of origin is because Tolkien was afraid that people would say, you're saying this is an alternate past of Earth, but their nicotine is not indigenous to Europe, so how do you... And then, he should have just said, shut up. Like, that was his favorite answer to a lot of questions. Like, why didn't the Eagles go to Mordor? Shut up. There really is footage of Tolkien saying that. But yeah, that's the pipeweed. Hobbit holes. Hobbit, actually, the word hobbit is derived from hobbitla. There was originally 3 types of them. There were Harfoots, Stores, and Fallowhides. And the Harfoots like to dig out burrows, holes, and the Stores and the Fallowhides called them hobbitla, which means hole dweller. And then they just started calling themselves hobbits, and they became the sort of dominant species of hobbit. There's 3 kinds of hobbits, but they're in the Third Age. In the late Third Age, they're almost all Harfoots. Merry and Pippin show signs of like the Fallowhide and Stores sort of strains, but yeah. Fireworks, of course. Yeah, Gandalf brings fireworks to the Shire. Everybody loves them. Not much to say. Boromir dies in the first chapter of The Two Towers. Not much to say there. Legolas and Gimli, mentioned them early. Members of the Fellowship. They bickered, then they became really close friends for the rest of their lives. Well, for the rest of Gimli's life, because Legolas is an elf. Council of Elrond, of course, was the council at Imladris that basically sought an answer to what is the final disposition of the One Ring, and it was decided that it should be brought to Mordor, and then that 9 walkers will embark on this quest. 9 was chosen because there were 9 Nazgul, and there was also a lot of flashback. You learned a lot in the Council of Elrond about the history of the One Ring. You learned about what happened to Gandalf, that he was captured by Saruman, and you learned about Radagast, and all. You learned about a whole bunch of things. Orcs/goblins, they are sort of like the evil foot soldiers. They were created by Morgoth in the Years of the Lamps, well, really the Years of the Trees, late Years of the Lamps. They were created in mockery of elves. They may actually have been elves at one point. Tolkien really never settled on a definitive origin of them. Potatoes, it's a meme. Sam says it in the movie. He says it in the book too. It's actually almost exactly word for word, that conversation. He doesn't say mash and boil and stick him in a stew in the book. That's a great line. You have my sword, my bow, and my axe is from the movie. It's not in the book. You shall not pass was a line that Gandalf said in the film. It was actually ad-libbed by Ian McKellen. It was adapted from the speech. You cannot pass. I am the wielder... Oh, I'm screwing it up already. You cannot pass. I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire... Oh, I'm sorry, the dark shadow... I'm doing this from memory. The dark shadow will not avail you, flame of Adun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass. And then one last time, a little while later, you cannot pass. Ian McKellen came up with You Shall Not Pass. They changed that last part. It's a pretty great movie moment. Other cool memes everyone knows. There's lots of them. They're taking the hobbits to Isengard. It was a big one. The tomato. Who could forget that? All right. So, yeah, this is... I might have to split this into 2 videos. I don't know. But let's move this down to... Oh, God. Why is it... I guess they put black text because the iceberg is there, but that's not a good choice. Okay, the ring wraiths, the Nazgul, they were men. Some of them are from Numenor. Some of them are from Rhûn. They were kings of men, but they were all like evil tyrants, despots, and they were given 9 rings of power by Sauron. Sauron had stolen those rings of power from the elves, of course. And they became wraiths in his service. They became bound to him because he had the One Ring. Nazgul is black speech of Mordor. It means ring wraith. And that's the second thing on there, Nazgul. They are the same thing. There's nothing to explain there other than Nazgul means ring wraith. Éowyn and Éomer, they were Theoden's nephew and niece. Their parents died. He took them in. He considered them his own children. He called Éomer his son and Éowyn his daughter. So they really were his adopted children. Éomer became the king of Rohan after Theoden's death. Not much to say there. King Theoden, just mentioned him. He's king of the Mark. They call it King of the Mark because the name of the land, it originally had a different name, but the men of Rohan call it the Riddermark. That's in their language. Gondor calls it Rohan. Riddermark is what they call it, though, and they call it also just the Mark, so the king of the Mark. Why didn't they bring the eagles to Mordor? And then J.R.R. Tolkien says, shut up. it wouldn't have worked. It's a bad idea. The Eagles would have probably stolen the ring. And, it's just a bad idea. Stealth was important. Sauron would have seen them. He's got the Eye of Sauron. He's got archers. He's got all kinds of crazy stuff. Also, the Eagles would have just refused to begin with. Even if they didn't refuse, like I said, they would have been corrupted by the ring. There's a little typo here. The riders of Rohan, the Rohirrim, these are the men of Rohan. They're called the riders because horses are incredibly important in their culture. They name every horse. The horse is considered a soldier of Rohan. The horses are buried in honor if they fall in battle. It's part of their culture. So they're called the Riders of, not the Rinders, the Riders of. It's just a typo, probably. The Mirror of Galadriel, I mentioned this earlier. It's a basin in Lothlorien. She fills it with water, and then you see things. You look into it and you see things. You might see things from the past. You might see things from the present. You might even see things that haven't happened yet. They could be true things. They could be false things. Frodo saw the Eye of Sauron. Sam saw trouble in the Shire, which later turned out to be true. So, that's the Mirror of Galadriel. The Striders, there's no Striders. This is a thing that I think the Hobbit films might have started this. There are no Striders. There's Strider, who is Aragorn. Aragorn was called Strider in Bree because he walked everywhere. He didn't have a horse. He walked everywhere, but he had long strides. He was a tall man, and he got to his destinations quickly. So they called him Strider. I think Éomer also called him Wingfoot at one point. So, yeah, they're not the Striders. They're the Dunedain, or the Rangers of the North. They're not the Striders. Saruman is a traitor. It is true. He turned against the White. He became Saruman of many colors, or at least that's what he fashioned himself as. He sided with Mordor. And then later, of course, he wasn't really working with them. He was working for himself. So he was found himself without no allies, and it ended very poorly for him. Grima Wormtongue was a man of Rohan that also was a traitor. He lusted after Éomer. He couldn't have her. She didn't like him. She found him repellent. And it was likely that this is what Saruman promised him, that he would have her if he worked for him. So he was the one who had Theoden believing that he was too old and too decrepit to do anything, and had him at what Tolkien referred to as dotage, where he was just this old man withering away. Hey, the score is really cool. It is really cool. Howard Shore's score for The Lord of the Rings. Very good. Aragorn's real age, believe it or not, Aragorn at the start of the story, when we meet him in the story, is 87 years old. He ascends to the throne at the age of 88. It's the whole Númenórean blood thing. He's descended from Elros, which was one of the first, of the lines of the kings of Númenor, and was also half elf. He was Elrond's brother, and they were given a choice, man or elf, because they had the blood of both. Elros chose to be a man. He lived to be something like 500 years old. Aragorn died when he was 210, so you could see where the line had sort of diminished, but at the same time, he still had a lot of that blood in him, and he lived a long time. He turned 88, by the way, March 1st, which was the day that he was in Fangorn Forest with Gimli and Legolas and met Gandalf the White. So the part in the movie when he tells Éomer that he's 87, he actually was 88. It might have slipped his mind that it was his birthday. He had other things on his mind, right? Éowyn falls in love with Aragorn, then Faramir. I don't know if she really fell in love with Aragorn. She was certainly attracted to him. She found him fair. She found him noble. She found him kind. She was never going to compete with Arwen. It was just not going to happen. She did wind up later falling in love with and marrying Faramir, and they became the prince and princess of Ithilien. Helm's Deep. Helm's Deep is a place called it's called the Deeping Combe, which is this sort of naturally fortified area that a fortress was built in Rohan years ago by a king named Helm, and he fought off many dangers there, so they started calling it Helm's Deep. That's where a big battle in the Two Towers happens. Durin's Bane refers to the Balrog that found its way underneath Moria in the late First Age after the War of Wrath. It stayed there for a long time until the dwarves came across it and wiped them out. And the ones that escaped, they knew there was something in there. They didn't know what it was, but they called it Durin's Bane. Durin was the king of the Khazad. That's what the dwarves called themselves, and he was killed by the Balrog, so that's why he's called Durin's Bane. The Mines of Moria are, of course, so there is the dwarven city of Khazad-dûm, right? and then below that the mines of Moria. Moria actually means dark pit, but it was their mines. It was their center of commerce. So there you go. Minas Tirith. There were actually two Minas Tiriths. Minas Tirith in the first age was in Beleriand, and then there was Minas Tirith, later on in Gondor. Of course, they're probably referring to the Gondor one. It was sort of the fortification, the fortified city in Gondor, and anytime Gondor was in real trouble, they would light the beacons, and then everybody would go to Minas Tirith. The capital was actually Osgiliath, but Osgiliath dealt with a plague and constant attacks. Osgiliath was actually very close to Mordor. So after Osgiliath was laid to waste and ruined, everybody sort of moved to Minas Tirith, and it became the capital in the Third Age. Okay. Lothlorien. Lothlorien is Galadriel's kingdom, or you really say queendom because it's hers, although the first king of Lorien was not her. But it's her fair kingdom. It's sort of like right north of Rohan, and it's where the Fellowship go. After they come out of Moria, Gandalf has died, and they come to Lorien, and that's where Galadriel and Celeborn are. Haldir's there as well. And it's an important place. They spent about a month there, and that's where Gimli and Legolas become friends. So that's why it's kind of important, because of Gimli had his sort of like view of the elves, his prejudices, and the elves had their own prejudices about dwarves, and some of them were very racist towards him when he first came there. Celeborn, the king, he's kind of he doesn't like dwarves. He has reasons, but he really just doesn't like dwarves. But Galadriel is very fond of dwarves. She always has been her entire life, and she treated Gimli with respect and admiration, and they became close, and then he became close to Legolas, so very important part for the story. Argonath? I think you mean, okay, I think that's supposed to be Argonath. Argonath is the Pillars of the Kings, which are giant statues of Isildur and Anarion at the Falls of Rauros, where the Anduin flows down into the Southlands. I think it's just a typo. It's not Aragonath, it's Argonath. The Anduin is the river that flows from north to south, and that's where Argonath is. Bilbo's scary face when he lunges when he asks Frodo to see the ring. Frodo shows it to him, and he sort of makes like a Gollum face and lunges forward, and it's sort of become a meme, That didn't happen in the book. It was a little different. He asked to see the ring, and he didn't lunge. He just sort of looked at it really sadly and forlornly, and it wasn't Bilbo that was affected in the book. It was actually Frodo. Frodo, when he was holding the ring and looking at Bilbo and looking at Bilbo looking at the ring, he saw Bilbo as a pathetic Gollum-like creature. Now keep in mind that he has not yet seen Gollum, right? But he saw what Bilbo could have become, and he was filled with dread and revulsion, and he felt the urge to strike Bilbo, which of course he would never do, so he put the ring away, and that was that. The Uruk-hai is, it means goblin folk, or goblin people, or goblin men. They are the race of goblins, or uruks, or orcs, whatever you want to call them, that Saruman bred in the Third Age that could withstand the sun, and they were taller and mightier. They weren't as smart as normal goblins, I think. I think the regular goblins, the orcs, they were a little smarter, it seemed. The Uruk-hai seemed kind of dumb, but they were good soldiers for Saruman. Saruman also wasn't a very good commander. He didn't have a lot of experience in warfare, so he didn't really do that well. But that's what the Uruk-hai were. They were bred from uruks and possibly also men, which is gross, but And there were also half-orcs that you saw in like Bree and such, and they may have been his early experiments in creating the Uruk-hai, because it was said towards the end that they were Saruman's agents. So it was also spelled wrong. It's not U-R-I-K, it's U-R-U-K. It's not Uruk-hai, it's Uruk-hai. Saruman's white hand, that was his symbol. He was the white, and his hand, the hand of sun, he had like a hand that was white that was painted on the Uruk-hai shields. That was sort of their sigil. The Dunedain or Strider, they're not Striders, they're Dunedain. The Dunedain are Númenóreans. They are descended from the men of Númenor. Of course, Númenor is gone. There are the Dunedain of the north, the Rangers, and there are the Dunedain of the south. For example, Faramir and his band are Dunedain as well. That's not much to say about that. That's just true. Shelob, there's no hyphen. It's just Shelob. Shelob is the giant spider-like creature. Not really a giant spider, but a spider-like creature. Is the daughter of Ungoliant, who was an evil spirit in the vague shape of a spider from, the Years of the Trees. And Shelob is the last daughter of Ungoliant and lives in Cirith Ungol, or underneath Cirith Ungol, in this dark pit. Gollum takes Frodo and Sam there and kind of strands them there for Shelob to snack on so that he can get the ring. Denethor goes crazy. It happens at different points in the books, but Denethor does completely lose his mind. He goes mad from despair and just loss of hope, and just having fought the same war for his entire adult life. Loss of his son Boromir, the perceived loss of his son Faramir. Even when Pippin pointed out that Faramir was not dead, that he was still breathing, it didn't matter, because Denethor felt that they were all going to die anyway, the enemy was going to win, so he kind of lost it. Faramir, the unwanted child. I feel like Peter Jackson played this up a bit. Faramir, I don't think he was the unwanted child, really. Not in the books, at least. I think that definitely he was the unfavorite. It was said, especially by Gandalf, that Faramir was more like Denethor than Boromir was, that he was the most like his father. He was like him in his looks, he was like him in his bearing, he was tall like his father, he was well-learned like his father. Boromir was more of a pure warrior, more of a meathead. Faramir was a warrior, but also a scholar like his father. So you'd wonder, why does his father favor Boromir so much? Why, if he has a son that's more like him, right? Why does he love Boromir so much more? And my theory has always been probably because Boromir is more like his mother, who has died, and that's why that he's like that. The movie made Denethor way worse of a father, and it made it seem like he really wanted Faramir to die. There's a line in the movie where he even says, "You wish I had died and not Boromir," and Denethor says, "I do wish this." It's a slightly changed version of a line in the book where he says, "You wish I had gone and not Boromir," and he says yes, because I think that if Faramir wouldn't have tried to take the ring, he would have lived. He would have gotten killed, and he would have had both sons. And Faramir was the one that was supposed to go. He's the one that the vision came to first. So, I'm spending a lot of time on this. Let's see. Let's move. Oh, I lost my spot. Mine's a Moria, White Hand, Shelob. Oh, okay. Here we are. Isildur's Bane is actually the ring. There was a vision that Faramir got, and then he got it again, and then the third time him and Boromir both got it. It had mentioned a halfling, or is it a hobbit? It mentioned Isildur's Bane. They didn't know what that was, but it's actually the One Ring. Viggo broke his toe in this scene. Of course, there's the famous scene from Lord of the Rings, or anybody who's seen the movies a bunch of times or knows a lot about the movies, they're showing it to somebody new. They always have to point this out. It's sort of like just a thing you do. He kicks an orc helmet and screams out in anger and anguish and sorrow because he believes that Merry and Pippin have died. That scream was real. Viggo didn't think that it was going to hurt so much kicking the helmet. He actually broke his toe. That was a real scream of pain. They left it in because it's a great shot. Everybody always talks about that. Lord of the Rings is an analogy for World War I and II. No, it is not. And Tolkien addressed this very simply. There's actually footage of him saying this, where he says, "I get people all the time that ask me about this. They say that, Lord of the Rings is an allegory for this war or that war, the First World War, the Second World War." Well, it's not. Right from the author's mouth. That's all he said. Well, it's not. It's not. Gollum is a personality inside the ring. That's a crazy fan theory. He's not. He's not a personality inside the ring, no. The only personality in the ring is Sauron. Smaug. Smaug is, of course, the dragon from The Hobbit. Not much to say there. He was killed by Bard. Mithril is sort of like the fantasy equivalent of titanium. It's like silver. It's true silver. It doesn't tarnish. It doesn't bend or break as easily. It's stronger, and it's also lighter. It's sort of like the perfect metal. So like I said, like titanium, it's also incredibly rare. Moria is pretty much the only place that they found it. I believe there were some hints that it may have also existed in Numenor, but Numenor's gone. Gay hobbits. Gay hobbits it was a meme, kind of a really mean-spirited meme that happened when the movies came out, where they were like, "Oh, look at them, they're gay," it's sort of been taken back since then, because I have friends that are like gay or whatever, and they'll say, "Oh, we're all gay hobbits. We eat a lot," and I'm like, "Okay, cool." I myself am not an LGBT person, but I do have a lot of friends that are, and like I said, it's sort of a mean-spirited meme that has been sort of taken back over time. So, Thorin Oakenshield. Thorin Oakenshield was the king under the mountain, also known as the king of Erebor. He was the king for a very short amount of time. It was just from The Hobbit. Of course, Thorin, he was the dwarf that was destined to be king. His grandfather Thror was the king, and then they were driven out of the mountain by Smaug. Thorin, of course, does become king under the mountain, although he does also die. King under the mountain becomes Dane II Ironfoot, which is Thorin's cousin. King Thranduil. Thranduil is the Elven king. In The Hobbit, they only referred to him as the Elven king. In The Lord of the Rings, you do learn that his name is Thranduil. He's Legolas's father. Like I said, he's an important character in The Hobbit, not such an important character in The Lord of the Rings, which is why it's kind of strange that he's named in The Lord of the Rings, but not named in The Hobbit. He's always called either just the Elven King or the King, but that's who Thranduil is. The Lego sets, of course, there are Lord of the Rings Lego sets if you're into that kind of thing. All right, let's try and go through this. Oh my God! All right, how many? Okay, so how many of these are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So, and we've done 1, 2. So, third one's really long. I think we're gonna do a part 1 and part 2. So I'm gonna do this third tier, and then we'll do a second video where I do the rest of it. Let's expand this a bit, right? Okay, Lego video games. There is Lego Lord of the Rings. There's Lego Hobbit. They do exist. You can get them on Steam. Gollum was a hobbit-like creature. He was straight up a hobbit. He was a type of hobbit called a Stoor. There were 3 types of hobbits. There were Stoors, Fallowhides, and Harfoots. And he was a Stoor. It was a specific type of Stoor called the River People. But yeah, they were Stoors. He is a hobbit. He's just been so twisted by the One Ring. Tom Bombadil is this interesting character that they run into early on in the story in the Old Forest. Merry and Pippin literally get eaten by a tree. Tom Bombadil is this merry singing guy. He saves them. He later saves them from the Barrow-wights. Who is Tom Bombadil? What is his nature? All I can say is that Tom Bombadil is a merry fellow. Bright blue his jacket is, and his boots are yellow. You're not meant to know the nature of Tom Bombadil. He's supposed to be a mystery. Tolkien refused to explain who he is. There's no explanation. Physically, he's based on a toy that his children had. But there's also a book, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which is a nice light read if you're ever interested in that. Where is Frodo going at the end of The Return of the King? He's going to the Undying Lands, which used to be part of the planet Arda. It's not anymore after the Calabeth. It's a place called the Undying Lands, where there are various realms. The chief of which is Valinor. There's a bunch of others, though, but he's going to the Undying Lands. He's not dying. Some people misunderstand that. He will be counted among the dead because he leaves the planet never to return, but he will live there for some time. He's only 51 years old at that point, and he's physically like 34, so, because of the One Ring halting his aging for some time. That being said, Frodo goes there along with Bilbo, and of course a bunch of characters that are supposed to go there. Normally mortals don't go to the Undying Lands. It's forbidden. Tuor went there long ago. Tuor was a man, but he wound up by special grace becoming immortal. He became an elf. Frodo and Sam and, Frodo and Bilbo, eventually also Sam, and believe it or not, Gimli as well, all sail west to the Undying Lands. They do not become undying, as far as we know. They probably were not given that special grace that Tuor was. There were reasons that Tuor was given that don't apply here, but that's where he was going. He's going to basically to Valinor. Aemon is the landmass. So there you go. Gollum is a drug addict. I hear this a lot, that Gollum is like sort of an allegory of a drug addict because he's sort of like addicted to the ring. There's no allegory in Lord of the Rings, right? There's applications, which means that you could apply the things in the text to various different aspects of your life or of the world. So you could say that Gollum is like a drug addict, that drug addicts behave like Gollum, or Gollum behaves like a drug addict, right? It doesn't mean that that was the intention of the author. It's just an application. The reader applies it. And Tolkien was okay with this. He liked application. He did not like allegory where like, for example, the Narnia books, Aslan is an allegory for Jesus. And that's it. That's the end of it. He's not anything else, right? So that's what Tolkien didn't like. So Frodo was blonde. They never mention his hair color in the books. Some of the oldest art would show him as blonde or brown-haired or black-haired. It didn't really matter. There's no reason to believe he's blonde. There's no reason to believe he's not blonde. His hair color is just not mentioned. I will say that blonde hobbits are rare. Sam's eldest daughter was blonde, and it was mentioned that many of the children born in that year, 1420 of the Shire Reckoning of the Third Age, were blonde. There were a lot of blondes born in the Shire in that year, and it was considered kind of unusual. Even gayer hobbits. It's a line from a movie. Somebody says we're like even gayer hobbits. There you go. Galadriel wanted the ring for herself. She was tempted, certainly, and Frodo just offered it to her. He says, I will give this to you if you ask for it, and she admits that she does want the ring, because she has been ruling over Lothlorien for some time, and she sees the end of her kingdom coming, right? If Frodo succeeds, which is very unlikely, but let's say he succeeds, the One Ring is destroyed, her own ring loses its power, her realm fades. It doesn't have that same protection. It's not like a piece of the Undying Lands on Middle-earth anymore, and she'll wind up having to just pass to the west, which is what she does. If Frodo failed, then Sauron gets the One Ring. She can't use her ring anymore. It's not safe to wear a ring of power if Sauron has the ruling ring. So either way, it falls, right? She loses her kingdom. So taking the One Ring, especially with it being so freely offered, is her way out, her way to keep her kingdom. She can overthrow Sauron, keep her realm forever, but she knows she would become evil. The power in the ring is wholly evil. It cannot ever be used for good, because only ill will come out of it. Boromir's black hair. I believe they did mention Boromir's hair color in the books, and he did have black hair. Faramir certainly had black hair. So there you go. Hobbits' birthday traditions. Hobbits are interesting. They throw big parties, but they don't get birthday gifts. They give away birthday gifts. So that's kind of part of the reason that Bilbo's party was so attended. He invited pretty much the whole town, and there were 144 people that were specifically invited into the pavilion, which was sort of like his honored guests, and everybody that came got a present. They were said to be very good presents because Bilbo was very rich and very generous. Usually the gifts that were given away by hobbits were little tchotchkes that they weren't of any use or any value, but they were things that hobbits just like to keep around. Just whatever object that they had that they just didn't want to get rid of. They just kind of liked having it. They called them mathams. But Bilbo was actually giving away really good gifts, not mathams, at his party. So, yeah. The Malern trees are trees that, there was a really, really, really big one in Numenor, and they tried to get seeds from it to flower elsewhere. They couldn't figure out, they just couldn't manage to cultivate until they gave them to Galadriel, and there's Malern trees all over Lorien, and that's where they build their homes in the trees. So Galadriel's gift to Sam was a box of soil from Lorien with a Malern tree seed inside of it. He planted that in the Shire, so now the Shire would have a Malern tree. Frodo's PTSD, yeah, Frodo had... Tolkien wouldn't have known the term post-traumatic stress disorder. He would have known it as shell shock or possibly combat fatigue. But it's really the same thing. Post-traumatic stress disorder. He definitely was traumatized by the war, by the ring, by the wound from the Morgul blade, by Shelob's poison, all the horrors he had seen. That's part of why he sailed west, to be healed from all that. Where are the Entwives? Nobody knows. Sauron might have killed them. That was sort of like the going theory that Tolkien had, but he said that they likely died. He doesn't know exactly how they died. They're just gone. They could still be out there, but they probably died. Aragorn and Arwen are distantly related. Yeah, they're actually cousins, but so far removed, 60 generations removed, that they might as well just not be related. I mentioned that Aragorn is descended from the line of Númenórean kings, which started with Elros, who's Elrond's brother, right? So, she's Elros's sort of grandniece, right? Aragorn's cousin. But Elros was, in the Reckoning of Men, was 60 generations ago. There's about 30 or so generations back to Isildur and Elendil, and then another further 30 generations back to Elros. And it really shows you the difference in the lifespan of the man and the elves. I think that there are much closer related characters that wind up marrying in Tolkien's works. Usually they don't marry if they're too closely related. First cousins aren't supposed to get married. It does happen. Pharazôn took Muriel as his wife. They were first cousins. She did not want to be his wife, partially because she didn't think he was suitable, and partially because they were cousins, and that was not something that they did in Númenor, but he did it not because he loved her, but because he was seizing the throne of Númenor. The most glaring bit of inbreeding happened between the children of Húrin. Túrin Tarambar and his sister Nienor married, and she even conceived a child with him. She didn't have the child; they both died. But they didn't know that they were brother and sister, because she was afflicted with a curse, and it wiped out her memory. And he just hadn't seen her since she was like a little girl, so he didn't recognize her. And since she didn't have a memory, she couldn't say what her name was. So that was a tragedy, and once they found out, they both took their own lives because of what happened, So it's not something that's like a common thing in Tolkien's work where relatives marry each other. And when it does happen, they're usually so far apart that they might as well not even be related at all, like Aragorn and Arwen. There was also Arvedui, who married a distant cousin, but like I said, very distant. They might as well not have been related at all. Okay, I got off on a tangent there. The future Amazon adaptation. I guess this is a little old. The first season of Rings of Power has come and gone. We're waiting on the second season. There were other dragons in Middle-earth. I actually mentioned a bunch of them by name earlier. Other than Smaug, there was Calagan, Glaurung, Skaitha, Gostir was another one. And there were just unnamed dragons out there. Hobbits running around naked in an ancient cemetery. This happened in the book. After they had left Bombadil, they traveled through the Barrow Downs, but they wound up getting captured by Barrow Wights, which are sort of spirits, lingering spirits. They possibly were the spirits of men killed by the Witch King of Angmar ages ago. Bombadil rescues them, and they take off. They were dressed in shrouds. They take that off, and Bombadil just has to cast off those shrouds, run naked through the grass. You'll feel better. And you ever feeling down, get captured by a ghost, dressed in a shroud, things aren't going so great. Try it. Run naked through a field of grass, right? Maybe a cemetery. Don't try it. It's terrible. Don't do that. Anti-war messages, well, I would say kind of, sort of. Faramir had the best take on war. He didn't love war, but he knew that, it was sometimes necessary. Faramir's take on war is probably Tolkien's take on war. Gandalf is not human. No, he's not. He's an angel. A being called an Ainu from the Ainur. The Ainur are like angels, and he's specifically a type of Ainu called a Maya. And the Maya are sort of servants of the Valar. The Valar are like the chief angels. So that's what Gandalf is. He is, though, an incarnate put into a frail humanish body. So it's an interesting, all of the wizards are incarnates. Glorfindel saves Frodo. Yes, so they never put this into a film. In the Peter Jackson films, it was Arwen. Ralph Bakshi's cartoon film, it was Legolas for some reason. But it was in the books, it was Glorfindel, who was a hero of the First Age. And he had died in the Fall of Gondolin. But then he was, of course, resurrected, like all elves are. And he was actually sent back to Middle-earth on a mission similar to what the wizards were sent for, specifically to help out Elrond. But yeah, the sun is feminine. The sun is the daughter of Lorelin, the Golden Tree of Valinor. The moon is the son of Telperion, the Silver Tree. And they are bore by Maya across the sky. The Maya, Arian, I almost forgot her name. Arian bears, she's a she, and she bears the daughter of Laurelin, the sun, and then Ithilien, I believe. Well, Ithil's moon. I think it's Ithilien bears the moon. I'm sorry. Ithilien is the seed. Telperion, I believe his name is. Telperion bears the moon. So in Tolkien's world, the sun is feminine, the moon is masculine. Frodo failed. He did not. Failed, right? He didn't destroy the ring, but he did something nearly impossible and got the ring to Samathnaur. And he succeeded because it was because of Frodo that the ring was destroyed. You could say that, yes, Gollum is the one that destroyed the ring. Frodo is the one that insisted that they don't kill Gollum, that they don't strand Gollum tied to a tree, that they show Gollum mercy. And it was because of that Gollum was there to destroy the ring. He also issued a command to use the true power of the One Ring and issued a command to Gollum. And that command basically said, if you touch me again, if you attack me in any way, you will be cast into the fire. Of course, Gollum did attack him, and he was cast into the fire. So, and there was a little divine intervention involved in that, of course. But, Frodo was the hero, of course. Sam was the hero, too, the chief hero. But Frodo didn't really fail. He failed. The Scouring of the Shire. So, scouring means cleaning. And this wasn't shown in the films, but... while everybody was partying down and enjoying themselves after the fall of Sauron, Saruman had escaped from Isengard. He was actually just let out by Treebeard, who just figured, yeah, he seems like he's sorry about what he did. And he traveled to the north, and he took over the Shire. The Shire was already sort of being taken over by Otho Sackville Baggins. And people were getting pretty sick of him, but then Saruman was sort of the man behind the man in that situation, and they called him Sharky, which is an adaptation of Sharku from the Black Speech of Mordor, means old man. It might not be the Black Speech, it might just be an Orcish dialect, but either way, the Scouring was the cleaning of the Shire to get rid of all the wicked men, the half-orcs, Saruman, Grima, all that. The Battle of Bywater was the climax of that. Okay, where was I? Scouring of the Shire. Where is that? Okay, Saruman's death, that happened right after the Scouring of the Shire, the Battle of Bywater, and all that. Grima killed him. He slit his throat from behind. He kind of had it coming, Saruman. Then Grima was killed by Hobbit archers shortly after that. They kind of did that in the movie a little bit differently. It happened at Orthanc. Grima did kill Saruman by stabbing him instead of cutting his throat, probably because it's just less gruesome to show in a film. And it was Legolas that shot Grima, but that's what happened in the book. That was it happened in the Shire. Éowyn is suicidal. Éowyn was full of despair, very unhappy. Sort of the only thing that she had to look upon was Aragorn, and he was just not interested. Her beloved uncle, who was like a father to her, Theoden, had slipped into dotage. She considered herself a shield maiden. She considered herself just as much of Rohirrim as any other person in Rohan, but she was just forced to be a maid to the king and take care of him, and she just felt like she wasn't getting her due, and she wanted her raison d'etre, so to speak, and the Return of the King was to ride out to battle and perish nobly. Didn't work out that way. She survived. She killed the Witch King. She was still really depressed after that. Faramir sort of brought her out of it. They fell in love. But, yeah. Denethor be drinking the Kool-Aid, yeah. So aside from the madness I mentioned earlier with Denethor, he was messing around with the Palantir. He did commune with Sauron. And because of that added to his madness. He believed that Sauron was unbeatable and that he was doomed and that nothing he can do about it, and that led to his end. When he burned himself, he tried to burn Faramir as well. Thankfully, Gandalf and Pippin saved him. But when he burned himself, he had the Palantir with him, and for the longest time, anybody who looked in it could only see flaming hands. So there you go. The caves of Helm's Deep. The glittering caves behind Helm's Deep are where, when the walls were breached, that everybody else could sort of fall back to that. Gimli went there. He just loved it. He was like, oh my god, they call it a cave. It's beautiful. There's minerals. They glitter. It's amazing. And Legolas was just like, what are you talking about? Because elves don't really like caves, you know, just like dwarves don't like forests, which is funny because Legolas lives in a cave, right? He lives in Mirkwood in a cave, but he didn't think it was going to be so great until until Gimli took him there, later on. And that's the next thing, Legolas and Gimli's promise. So Gimli made Legolas promise that he would come to the Glittering Caves with him, and in turn, Gimli had to go to Fangorn Forest, which he was afraid of. He didn't want to be in there. So there you have it. I think by the time that came around, though, Gimli was kind of cool with Fangorn Forest. He had met Treebeard and everything. So, Toriel is Peter Jackson's OC's original character. Yeah. Although I don't know if I think it's Peter Jackson. It could have been Guillermo del Toro, but I think it was Peter Jackson. Toriel is in the Hobbit movies. She has this weird love triangle where Legolas loves her, but then she starts falling in love with Killy, and it's like, what are you guys even doing? What is this movie even? Legolas wasn't in the Hobbit. Yeah, the book. The only named elf in the Hobbit was the Elven King, and he didn't have a name. Actually, no. The only named... it was Elrond, actually. Yeah, the Elven King was named later on in The Lord of the Rings. I mentioned that earlier. He was Thranduil. But Elrond was the only elf that they mentioned by name. Everything was... There were elves there. There were elves there. There's the Elven King. There's another elf. There's an elf. It was like that. Legolas was not a character in The Hobbit. It's likely that he was sitting at home in the cave when Thranduil rode out to Erebor. So that's why they didn't bring the eagles to Mordor. So it's a bit of a meme, Yeah, they had archers, they had the Eye of Sauron. Just not a good idea. The elves love the sea. The elves do love the sea, and what it is that they can be instilled with what's known as the sea longing, the urge to sail west, and it can even happen to elves that are not from the west or have never been there and have no connection to it, such as the Sindar or Sylvan elves. It happens to Legolas when he, after they go through the Pass of the Dead, they wind up at the sea at the southern coast of Gondor, and for the first time, he sees the sea and he sees the gulls. That's the big thing that gets him. The gulls instill the sea longing in him, and now he will never be able to not stop. He will never be able to stop thinking about sailing, And eventually, he did sail west with Gimli, but it was a while later, over 100 years after the Lord of the Rings. Badass Farmer Maggot. Yeah, Farmer Maggot. If you saw the movie, he was just like a one-off character that sort of appeared behind some corn, or you didn't really get to see him. He was a character that Frodo was really afraid of him. When in Frodo's youth, he would go to Farmer Maggot's farm and steal his mushrooms, and Farmer Maggot would set his dogs on him. And one day he caught him and he told him, the dogs, if you see this guy again, you can just go ahead and eat him. And Frodo was really... He wouldn't have done that, right? But Frodo was really afraid and never went back. And then when they were by the Brandywine and about to, they wound up on Farmer Maggot's land and they wound up staying with him. Frodo was really afraid of this guy. It was years later, he's 50 now and he's still afraid of this guy. So he must have been, kind of a badass. And he did recognize Frodo, but, he wasn't a kid anymore, He was 50 now. But because Frodo was so scared of him, Pippin did the talking. They didn't meet Merry until after they crossed the Brandywine. Pippin did the talking, But he gave him a bunch of mushrooms and a dinner, and they even drove him in their wain to the where the ferry is. And you find out that Farmer Maggot was friends with Bombadil, and that he had told off a Nazgul. So he didn't really take any crap from anybody. Faramir would never try to steal the ring. It's true. Faramir in the movie, they kind of did him a little dirty there. He was very tempted by the ring. He eventually he captured, Frodo and Sam and Gollum. He really didn't capture them in the books. He did lead them to his hideout, but they were never sort of like arrested like that. They were certainly never bound or anything like that. They were never brought to Osgiliath. They were never brought off course. He actually helped them a great deal. When he found out that they had the ring, because Sam sort of slipped when he was speaking about it, he realized that, this was too important and realized what they were trying to do. Faramir was a much better character in the book than he was in the movie. Billy Boyd's song. Billy Boyd was the actor that played Pippin. There was, of course, the famous tomato scene where Denethor is eating a disgusting meal and Pippin is singing. and it's intercut with Faramir nearly dying and Osgiliath. And it's sort of like a really grim scene. I believe that Billy Boyd actually came up with the melody and the song and everything, so it's really kind of cool. And finally for today, because I think we have to break this into 2 videos, because we're at an hour and I'm not even through this, the Red Book of Westmarch. That was Bilbo's book, right? When he wrote his book, he kept talking about it. Write my book, gotta write my book. His story, There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Tale, which became The Hobbit, and then he gave the book to... It was bound in red leather. That's why it's called the Red Book. The Westmarch thing I'll get to in a second, but the Red Book was given to Frodo, and he wrote his account in there, his book, which was called The Downfall of the Lord of the Rings and the Return of the King, as told by the Little People. And then he gave that to Sam. Sam sort of finished up the last bits there. And then there were other parts added to it by, I believe, Theoden's grandson wrote the tale of Arwen and Aragorn, and then there was notes that Bilbo had compiled that he called translations from Elvish lore, when that's what we would call the Silmarillion. And then there was the Great Tales, which were the more detailed accounts of certain stories that were either touched upon or briefly told in the Silmarillion, and that was the children of Húrin, Beren, and Lúthien, the fall of Gondolin, and the fall of Númenor. And that was all put into this one giant book, the Red Book of Westmarch. Westmarch was west of the West Farthing, and after the War of the Ring, Aragorn actually expanded the borders of the Shire, because he was the king of Arnor now, and he could do that, and he added Buckland. Buckland was sort of Shire adjacent. It was kind of like an unofficial part of the Shire already, but it became official. And an uninhabited land called Westmarch, and the hobbits expanded into that area. And it was said that eventually Westmarch became what the Shire was called. So even though it came from Bywater, from a place called Hobbiton, it was referred to as the Red Book of Westmarch. But anyway, I think, because we have, look at this, we have all of this to get through, all of this to get through, and all of this to get through, and all of this to get through. I'm going to have to break this into 2 videos. So I'll see you guys next time.